Hello, I'm Anna Couvinhas, and over 8 years I've done ethnographic and participatory research with multiple deep-rooted communities, most of them located in extremely remote areas of Africa. One of the projects that remained close to my heart was called the Field Diaries, in which we aimed at understanding and nearing target communities using a set of community-driven tools. During the years, I worked closely with these groups. The projects gradually became more digital as the internet and mobile devices became widely accessible, even in remote areas of industrially developing countries. So, I began combining participatory research with digital user experience and ended up creating digital products based on highly participatory user research. 2 years ago, I moved to Portugal to work at a tech company called OutSystems. At that time, UX research was done by non-researchers. Now we have a multidisciplinary team of 7 UX researchers, and we work closely with UX designers, data scientists, content writers, internal developers, and, of course, our users. During these 2 years at OutSystems, besides doing what a UX researcher does in a tech company, I have been introducing participatory research methods in an agile, fast-paced environment. As an ethnographic researcher, my job focused on impacting real-world environments. I have traveled around the world, got close to and even lived with specific groups of people, collecting data about their work, lives, and cultural attitudes. Since this work is strongly tied to social or developmental organizations, I've been lucky enough to meet some of the most fascinating cultures and people on earth. That's why, for many people, seeing me join a tech company came a bit of a surprise. But here's the thing, whether you are working with communities in far flung corners of the world or sitting in a room full of software developers, the concept remains the same. It's all about the users. In this talk, I will draw a parallel between human development field studies and those performed in the context of a software company. I will then explain how you can use participatory research methods such as field diaries to improve your user's experience continuously. I first realized the full potential of written and photo diaries in Mozambique and Ethiopia, where efforts by entities to help people often fail due to the lack of on-the-ground knowledge about the communities in which they operate. In fact, projects and products can fall short of their original intent and design because of cultural beliefs or different priorities. For instance, a classic example is the mosquito nets being distributed to fight malaria only to have the inhabitants of coastal regions to use the net for fishing, as this is the higher economic priority. To address this, we implemented written and photo diaries so that people could clearly express what is important in their everyday lives, which in turn allowed us to identify community changes, whether big or small. As an example, one of our agroforestry stakeholders was generating a substantial amount of new employment in rural areas. And not all changes were positive. The diaries allowed us to identify and avoid major conflicts between locals and the company, perform program course corrections, reduce downtime, and rationalize production, as well as spot further business opportunities. Moreover, we provided research participants with cameras to capture everyday life through community photography. Frame by frame, they captured unconventional scenarios that outsiders, like me, would never be able to witness. From witch doctor rituals, household routines, and traditional dances to farming spirits. Using this set of participatory tools, I was able to collect rich information from our research participants without actually living in those communities. In-depth ethnography is one of my biggest passions. But it's not always possible to spend months living within the studied communities. This is why, in this talk, I refer to the research activities in which I systematically visited the communities. I will not tackle the projects in which I was living within the communities, as it most likely won't be your case. Back then, field diaries helped us address the question, what happens when the company arrives? Now, at OutSystems, we use the same methods to address a different question. What happens when users develop with our platform? Instead of receiving handwritten diaries and photos, we receive digital journals and screenshots from our users about their experience. Then, we further explore their needs, concerns, and improvement suggestions with in-depth interviews. It's all about establishing proximity with our users and asking the right questions. So, regardless of working in an extremely ethnographic context or in a digital company, the research methodologies share common aspects. With our OutSystems UX research team increasingly embracing a participatory approach in which we want to deeply understand the reality of our users. But we also want them to be part of our solutions. By keeping diaries, we are moving towards a continuous research vision to timely identify new user needs and ensure that we are always building the right thing. With today's fast-paced environment, the needs of our users are changing often and quickly. Therefore, no longer makes sense to only analyze telemetry data and perform short-term research. However, by adopting these and other proactive approaches for regenerative research, new challenges are emerging with regards to the efficient collection and analysis of large amounts of qualitative information. From my experience, I can say that continuous user research is much more challenging than short-term research, but it's definitely worth it. The three main challenges that I have been facing with continuous research are reaching research participants, persuading them to continuously collaborate, and digesting the gathered information. When working with highly remote communities in Africa, getting research participants is an adventure per se. Even if you speak the same language as your research participants, I learned that having a local research buddy is crucial. Before visiting the communities, this person will tell you how you should behave, as their culture is most likely very different from yours. It's crucial that you get to know the social norms in advance and embrace the culture as it is, and take time to absorb and accept it. Remember, you are there to bond with people and to understand their perceptions and behaviors. If you display a criticizing or defensive posture, you will create barriers that prevent you from executing smooth and unbiased research. If you are going to study people's everyday lives, as I did, you will probably talk with individuals that behave and say things that might disturb you a lot. So it's important to be prepared in advance for this kind of conversation. And the only way to anticipate this is to have honest and open conversations with your local body. I recall, for example, when I was talking with a community in Kenya that trades their children for cows. You definitely need to be prepared for these kinds of conversations. It's also essential that you know in advance what should be your expected behavior. For example, in Mozambique's northern regions, an outsider shouldn't approach locals without talking first to the community leader, who is usually the spiritual leader. And to find a leader, you need precious help from your research buddy. He also points out specific people that fit your target because he knows everybody. Often, our target participants were smallholder farmers, housewives, or workers at project stakeholder companies. Then it's time to start luring research participants. From my experience, one of the most effective icebreakers is to introduce yourself in the local dialect, even if the research participants know how to speak a language that you also know. Of course, sometimes I need to bring an interpreter with me for the interviews, but I always introduce myself in that way. Don't expect these initial talks to be quick and formal. One of the things that you will learn is to dedicate time to build trust and empathy, especially if you want people to collaborate with you by capturing their daily lives through diaries. You cannot rush the process and just give them a bunch of directives on how to record information. Often, during this first contact and without previous notice, research participants will expect for you to have a meal in their backyards and a long shot under a shade of a cashew tree. So you need to be prepared to share your personal story because they are as curious as you are. Also, you should always count on delays due to muddy roads, broken bridges, and so forth. So, the process of getting research participants in extremely remote communities might take many hours, and it's deeply linked to the cultural setting in which you will perform research. So be ready to give a lot of yourself, both emotionally and physically. At the software development company where I work currently, reaching research participants is quite a different challenge. But there are some similarities in the process. First, it's important to clarify who our users are. OutSystems is a modern application platform with its drag and drop interface. Even users who aren't professional developers can build enterprise-grade apps. Therefore, our target users are the low-code developers that build applications using the platform. The low-code developers are the users that create the field diaries. The great majority of OutSystems low-code developers work in mid to large companies, and these companies are our customers. Sometimes we reach out to end users, the users of the applications, but our primary targets are the low-code developers. So, compared with other research contexts in which a large portion of the society has the criteria to participate in the study, for example, adults who do shopping in supermarkets, the pool of potential research participants in the low-code context is much smaller. This is why a big part of our research participants are OutSystems community members who often proactively provide snippets of valuable information. Much like my work in the African remote communities, we need to use a specific language to communicate with users. Of course, I don't need to learn how to introduce myself in their dialect, but I learn in advance the low-code developers' language, or in other words, the technical jargon. Also, I often bring along technical folks who help me to understand better what users are communicating. They are my research buddies in the technological field. At OutSystems, we don't need to get the blessing from the spiritual leader, but we should take into account the social forces within the companies. Things like social norms, decision-making rules, and power dynamics. Companies work like communities. There is a social structure. Researchers need to be aware of the company's different roles and how we should approach different people to reach the right research participants. From my experience in Africa, the best way to create a rapport with research participants was to dedicate a lot of time in the digital sector. We also need to be conscious of the time the participant is expecting and willing to dedicate to the research. And as they tend to have a tight schedule, we must optimize our conversations and inform them in advance on how long the research initiatives will take. Until now, I talked about the reasons to adopt field diaries as a research methodology. Also, I tackled one of the main challenges we have been facing with continuous research, which is reaching research participants. Stay tuned to learn more about the other two main challenges in the second part of this talk. Persuading participants to continuously collaborate with you, and digesting the gathered information.